Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And greetings to everyone who may be watching this short video. I wanted to talk today a little bit about modernity, and I hope to talk a little bit more about that. Probably you can find thousands of videos and podcasts on modernity. I'm just going to give a few of my thoughts from the perspective, again, of people who have moved from a secular Western culture into the Islamic way of life. One thing I found when I was in the process of converting, which took about 2 years of very intensive thinking and reflecting, is that you are dealing with two perspectives of reality, two perspectives of time, of history, and of course, having grown up in the secularized West, and that secularization has now spread across the globe. Growing up in a secularized West, you are raised with the perspective that other regions outside of the secularized West, let's say North America, Europe, now Australia, Russia, although I know Russia isn't technically the West, but let's say secularized and industrialized cultures, is that cultures and regions outside of those zones are seen as being medieval, or backward, or in need of catching up. So let's talk about obviously the Muslim world. We know about the debates that have raged over the last decades about the compatibility between Islam and the West, or Islam and democracy, and so on and so forth. And there are constant calls by different personalities, well-known, famous personalities, constant calls for the Muslim world to catch up with the secular West. And often, the Muslim world, let's say Muslim majority world, is derided as being stuck in the Dark Ages or being medieval. And perhaps even the way that Muslims dress is seen from Europeans who have had their mentality cultivated in such a way as to believe that they are modern. When they see the dress of Muslims, the traditional dress I'm talking about, which can come in many different forms and styles, but when they see that, then in their mind they are seeing someone who is medieval, someone who's stuck in the Middle Ages. And particularly in the 20th century, the Middle Ages were seen as barbaric and backward, like I said. And so if you wanted to say that something is backward or barbaric, you would say that that's really medieval. In actual fact, medievalists themselves say that there has been a very unfair stereotyping of the Middle Ages and of the medieval times, that actually they were a time of a great flourishing of culture, of literature, medicine, and architecture, and so on. So actually being medieval or looking medieval is not such a bad thing. We have, as we know, many psychological problems and neuroses that have arisen with the very rapid modernization of the world. So when you are basically stepping out of one zone the secularized, westernized zone into an Islamic zone, which includes, that whole way of life, you are actually moving away from a culture that has a particular perspective of history, like I said, which is that the Middle East and the Muslim world is medieval and it's backward. So you're moving out of that zone into the Islamic zone, which, just like the Middle Ages or the medieval era, has been again very wrongly stereotyped. And of course, we know that Muslims and the Muslim world have been very badly stereotyped. Again, there's probably thousands of videos and podcasts on that as well. So first of all, I would argue that for all the Muslims who feel that they are under pressure to modernize, whatever that means, and they feel kind of embarrassed maybe about looking medieval or being medieval, I would say be proud of looking medieval. The medieval ages were a great age. At least in the medieval times, we don't have at least 50% of the world walking around in cheaply produced shorts and t-shirts like we do now. So I argue that for all of this call for the southern hemisphere, including the Muslim world, to catch up and to modernize. Many years ago, when I was thinking about this, about 20 years ago, the thought crossed my mind that modernization equals homogenization. So culture that is being modernized is actually being homogenized. So now, if you go to different corners of the world, it doesn't really matter where you go, you will find the same culture. You will even find, again, like I said, everybody dressing the same. There's currently a movement in China for people to wear traditional Chinese clothes, which the style is called Hanfu. And excuse my pronunciation if it's not correct pronunciation, Hanfu. And I was looking at a video of a young woman who chooses to dress in traditional Chinese clothes, and it shows her on the metro in her traditional clothes. And she was saying how she gets teased, she gets people looking at her funny, she gets people asking, like, why are you wearing that? Now, what struck me about the image of her being on the metro in China, with these people staring at her like, what are you wearing that for? All of these people, men and women, were all wearing cheaply produced, or we can say expensive as well. They were all wearing shorts and t-shirt. Men and women, they were all like the same size as each other, the same look. They were all in shorts and t-shirt. So you tell me, I mean, this is a strange state of affairs where people don't realize how their minds have been colonized to the extent that they are now all walking around in clothes that were designed in the West, to the extent that their own traditional dress looks to them like something weird, like, why are you wearing that? Do we really want a world like where literally everybody's just walking around in jeans and t-shirt? This is not just about clothes, it's about style. Of course, it's comfortable and convenient. This is also about a mentality. It's also about what culture do you subscribe to? Do you have a sense of dignity, a sense of pride in your own traditional culture? Or have you kind of succumbed to what is convenient? And of course, modernization has been made cheap and convenient. That's been one of its objectives, the mass production of things. its objective has been to make it cheap and convenient. So of course everyone kind of drifts over to that. Another point I want to make is, do we have to all comply to modernity? I mean, of course, there's a lot of psychological pressure, like I said, from different famous personalities and writers and actors and academics and so on, saying again how half of the world needs to catch up with the other half. I would say, why? I mean, where is the law? Where is the obligation that we have to all look like you, and we have to have the same culture as you? Why? Why do we have to do that? Especially when industrialized cultures are using up an awful lot of the planet's resources and creating an awful lot of pollution and garbage, which the poorer nations have to, of course, sort through. I mean, we have images of children walking on garbage heaps, kind of salvaging what they can find in order to earn a living. Which brings me to my other point, which I've made in other speeches and other talks. Modernity is expensive. To be modern, you need to be rich, or you at least need to live in the wealthy part of the world. And in my observations from traveling around the world, it is the Southern Hemisphere that is paying for the hip, modern, advanced cultures of the Northern Hemisphere. Somebody is paying the price for us to be modern. And the people that are paying the price for that are the people from the Southern Hemisphere, who are, earning $1 a day, working in sweatshops, working on farms that are producing cash crops to sell to the Northern Hemisphere. So it's kind of ironic that, again, the Northern Hemisphere countries that are industrialized, that are using up an awful lot of resources that are mined from the Southern Hemisphere countries, and the labor, in fact, they even resort to the Southern Hemisphere countries because it's cheap labor, virtually slave labor. So they're paying their workers like a slave labor rate. And then they turn around and say, why are you poor? Like, you need to catch up and be modern. So modernity is expensive, like I said, and we need to have a reflection on the privileges that come with modernity. When I have travelled outside of the Western zone, and when I started to travel outside of the Western zone when I was about 18, first going to Japan, then Malaysia, then after that Egypt and several Middle East countries, also South America, I was able to reflect back on what the secularized West has lost, very much so in terms of its heart, and its spirit and its humanity. I'm not saying that people in industrialized, secularized Western nations are inhumane, not at all. People mean well. People do mean well, and they support charities, and and they go on campaigns and everything. But when you actually look at the culture in which we live today, there isn't time to feel. There isn't time to eat together. There isn't time to spend together. There isn't time to think about, people, to interact, to form a deeper human, not just a deeper human bond, a deeper human experience. There isn't time for that. The other day I was just on public transport and I saw a little girl, maybe of about 7, being completely ignored by her grandmother, who was just on her device. so this little girl, she just ended up looking out of the window because, I mean, for about 10 minutes, her grandmother was just looking down at her device. And we know very well that this is the state of affairs, particularly again in industrialized environments. Again, don't forget, who is paying for all of these materials, for our devices? It's the kids working in the mines, who are collecting the raw materials for our devices, who can't afford to go to school. So again, the people that are paying the price as well for us to have the latest whatever device are the kids who can't afford to go to school. Another issue is that when we're thinking of modernity and being modern, is the issue of debt and loans. So I was reading an article, in fact the article goes back to 1999, but it could have just been written today, talking about Brazil and the massive debt that Brazil is in. And Brazil is in so much debt because of the interest that is being charged on the loans that were made to Brazil. The same goes for Africa. Often we find people in Western media or just people commenting online, you know, when they feel that they're not getting the benefits from, say, the UK government, then they don't see the logic of like, oh, well, if we're not getting benefits and we're getting cuts to our benefits, to our welfare, then why are we making loans to countries, you know, say in Africa? We should stop making loans. But what people are not told is that those loans are making the West wealthy. So those loans come with interest payments attached. So a lot of the countries that are being loaned cash are actually only just about able to pay back the interest on that loan and not the loan itself. So it is a form of economic slavery. And if these zones, mainly some southern hemisphere zones, if they are economically enslaved, and actually even more impoverished probably today than they were even 20 years ago, how are these nations supposed to catch up and kind of, you know, and does the issue of democracy even come into it? Like we talk about democracy and it should be a kind of a global system, and systems that are not democratic are failing somehow. But tell me what is democratic about making someone a loan and charging them so much interest that they're never going to be able to pay back that loan? How is that democratic? So again, democracy, what is it? It's a kind of a system that again is being funded by the poorer nations. You know, I mean, you have to be able to afford democracy. So coming back to looking medieval and being medieval, because I've touched upon a lot of points, we need to return back to the values of nobility, the values of nobility and dignity. And I would argue that we need to change today's culture. There's a lot of psychological pressure on Muslims to obviously comply with Western, secular, industrialized culture, for want of a better word. It might not even be a culture, but let's just call it a culture. There's a lot of psychological pressure, and you can again see that on social media with a new kind of Muslim being created, that's kind of like a hip Muslim. Hey, you can be Muslim and you can be hip at the same time, and that's going to be acceptable, like, to everybody. We need to kind of take a step back and think, why do I feel like I'm under pressure to do this? I mean, why am I complying to this? Is everything about Western secularized, industrialized culture good? Aren't there some good things about my way of life? So I would argue that the reason why I wear hijab, the reason why I cover in the way that I do, in the classical way, according to the rulings, is because, I mean, many reasons, but one of them is that, yeah, I think we do need to change our culture. We do need to bring beauty and dignity back to culture. And we need to break away from this enslavement, psychological enslavement and physical enslavement, to all of those companies that are mass producing shorts and t-shirts and making a vast profit while everyone is walking around like a clone, you know, and actually enabling the very rich companies to get even richer. So have confidence in your traditional hijab, whether male or female. Have confidence in that, and be aware that it's part of bringing some dignity back, bringing some spirituality back into a world where we're rapidly losing any kind of spiritual culture or sense of spirituality. So thank you for listening, and inshallah I will see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.